Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. Can everyone hear me up the back there? Yes, thank you very much. Please enjoy your main course if it's still in front of you, but we're going to crack on with our presentation for this afternoon. Just before I introduce our speaker, Slido, of course, is the app we're using. If you'd like to submit a question, you can do that anonymously, or you can put your name to it, and we'll endeavour to get through some of those questions towards the end of our discussion this afternoon. The code that you need there, if you want to go to the site itself, is 24JUL, or you can just point your phone at the QR code there and it'll take you straight to the session that we're in this afternoon. As you would be well aware, the nuclear debate is one of the defining issues at the moment, certainly on a national level, and is going to be one of the defining issues of the federal election coming up, whenever that may be, possibly the end of this year or early next year. So today we're going to try to step past the politics, as difficult as that might be. That's probably mission impossible. We're going to give it a crack. Given that we are essentially an apolitical organisation, we've invited Jonathan Fisher here, who's the CEO of Cauldron Energy, to talk about uranium mining and also the nuclear debate as well. So would you please welcome Jonathan Fisher from Cauldron Energy, who's going to take you through a presentation first, and then we're going to have a bit of a chat after that. All yours.
G'day, thanks Tim. And look, it's fantastic to be here and look at the crowd. 18 months ago, we would not get a crowd like this wanting to learn or hear about nuclear or uranium. So I think that just demonstrates the support that we have and the change in sentiment in the state and federally. Our laws in WA haven't changed yet, but they're getting there. Now, and I'd like to point out, I don't have my clicker here, but you can see my slides. We are currently drilling the largest uranium drilling program in WA since the ban has been in place. So it's 25,000 metres. I've got representatives from our partners, Wallace, doing a fantastic job for us up on site, as well as TerraSearch, Somewhere, Appeal Catering, and Wireline Services, and our Indigenous partners, the Luncheon. So I'm going to talk about some stuff today, and the point is I'm going to say the silent stuff out loud. Now, I may well be crucified for this tomorrow, so we'll see how we go. And we're also, right now, I just want to apologise to, he's not in the room, but the Federal Climate Minister and Energy Minister, Chris Bowen. You see, there's a lot of political comics drawn about nuclear energy, and every single one of them has Chris Bowen drawn as a clown or as a dunce with a little hat on. It's not intentional, but maybe there's something there in the pattern. So he does appear in this presentation. I've got a bit of a background in the entire radiation industry across different things. So I run a uranium company. I used to buy and sell nuclear power stations in the UK. And I also built a radioactive waste repository here in WA. So WA has a world-class, it's the only facility of its type in the Southern Hemisphere, existing facility taking radioactive waste today. And it is an absolute competitive advantage for Western Australia. Now, Tim gave me a bit of a warning about being apolitical. So my opening statement, I am not a member of any political party, and I don't want this to be a political speech, but unfortunately, energy policy and uranium policy at a state level, they split down party lines. So we are going to say a few things political here. I'm not actually having a go at the Premier or the government. I should get on very well with Roger. But what we're here to do is educate your all opinion leaders, educate yourselves. You can go into your own networks and start kicking up a bit of a stink about this, because here's some feedback I got from a very senior but unnamed party person. They said, they were asked what the attitude was to uranium, and they said, oh, well, we've got all these priorities in the mineral sector, and they were talking about hydrogen. How's that going? And they were talking about the production tax credit for nickel, and I was like, wow, yeah, that's not going so well either. And so they said, for uranium, well, we don't see enough people making enough noise about it. There's not a concern to the community. So I said, all right, well, That's a challenge accepted. So please start talking about it more in the community as a real opportunity for the state. There's this picture of Roger up here. Now, he has admitted that WA has a role to play and a moral obligation to help our trading partners decarbonise. He says that by selling more gas, we can help Indonesia and India in particular burn less coal, therefore reduce emissions. Remove the word gas, put in the word uranium, and it works much, 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 much better. So that's what we're here to do. We do have 2 bans in place. We have a federal ban on nuclear energy. That is what Mr Dutton is going on about. And we have a state ban on uranium. That state ban on uranium is unpopular with the majority. Nuclear energy federally is a more tricky issue. That's more balanced. But uranium mining in WA is strongly supported by the broad majority of the community. It is down to Labor factional politics, and we've seen some really interesting stuff going on, at least over in Sydney. I think it's been here too with the CFMEU, yeah? Few issues there. Well, there's more to come on that, right? Now, what you've seen over east is that all the Labor premiers have been, effectively, they've gone full mission impossible on the CFMEU. They've fully disavowed all knowledge, right? Roger hasn't done that here yet. I don't know if that will happen, but if there's any media out there, I wish someone would ask him. Because there are 2 unions in WA that are blocking uranium at the state convention level at Labor. One is the AMWU. Steve McCartney is a very passionate anti-nuclear, anti-uranium campaigner, and the CFMEU. So if the CMFEU is disavowed and disappropriated, I guess, from Labor, I assume they don't get a vote at the convention level, I would think, and therefore does the uranium policy balance of power change? And in fact, if they also disavowed, does that mean there's a spare speaking slot at this year's convention? Because if there is, I'm up for it. Bit history. We've got a nuclear ban federally. We've been a nuclear nation since 1958. There's images here of HIFAR, which was our world-leading research reactor. So what happened? Well, HIFAR was a wonderful reactor, but it was getting to the end of their life. And John Howard understood that we needed a new one, but he needed to get a bill through the Senate to do it. And you know what? And this is, again, I'm not being political, but Labor refused to support the bill. The only way it could get through, as well as some regulations about nationalisation of the radiation industry, was with the Greens' support and actually the Australian Democrats. And so because of that, they traded a future civilian nuclear industry against building a world-class reactor that we have at Lucas Heights now, which saved lives every day. Anyone in this room, I guarantee you, you've had the benefit of Lucas Heights. Lucas Heights and the Opal reactor today generates about 25%, but up to 50% of the world's supply of Mo-99. That doesn't sound too exciting, but whenever you've had a nuclear energy scan and they inject some stuff into you, that's Mo-99. And actually, for a lot of the treatments for cancer, that's Mo-99. So if any of your family have received cancer treatment in Australia or in Southeast Asia that's come from ANSTO, and yet Labor still would not support it. So what they've done instead, they have a desire to get to 82% renewable. So what we see here on this chart, to be clear, that 82% is actually not required to meet our Paris objectives. There's some really detailed modelling on that. But 82% is what their policy is, and that's what we're going to get to, apparently. And so on this chart, you can see here, we are currently in the middle bit where the green lines are quite small, but they've tripled from the first bit. We need to go over to the next bit. We're already having social licence issues getting wind farms right through. What do you think it's going to do when you try and triple in the next 5 years? Do you think we're really going to get there? I've got some interesting conclusions, which I share with Simon Holmescourt, by the way. This chart comes from Simon, so thank you very much for highlighting the challenge that we have to meet net zero. A bit of background now on uranium mining ban. So I had the pleasure of seeing Colin Barnett actually this morning. Colin overturned the ban in 2008 and he allowed uranium mining. And then in late 2008, early 2009, the Anti-Nuclear Alliance lodged a formal petition with the upper house to reinstate the ban because uranium mine's really, really bad. And they scoured any West Australian, they scoured the state, any West Australian could sign that petition. They got 24 signatures out of the entire state. They then relodged it and they got 182. Okay, out of the entire state, that's how many people cared about it. If you want to know, the most popular petition that year was also something of Collins, where petition 61, I think it was, petitioning to overturn the proposed ban on the sale of marijuana smoking bongs. Right? 4,000 people were very, very worried about that. So 20 times the level that they were worried about uranium. Regardless, even with that low level, McGowan thought it was a good idea to put in a ban in place and therefore protect the left of the Labor Party so they wouldn't go over to the Greens. Now, despite that, if you look up on the chart, 3 of WA's top 25 companies are uranium companies. And actually, 25 to 50, we've got a whole other bunch too. We've got a world-leading capability in uranium in this country, in this state, but we could do so much more. I know we've got here in the room with us representatives from a number of the uranium companies here, my colleagues from the Uranium Forum down here. We've got activists here from the nuclear scene, and I'm going to call out Jazz here. So if there's one person in this room, actually in the country, doing more to promote nuclear energy than Jazz, it's maybe Will Shackle. But Jazz is phenomenal in the media, and if you should like hoard around her during networking and extract that knowledge and pass it on to your own networks. Jazz is fantastic, and she's from Perth. Right. Trends in nuclear, this is a bit of a meme here. We've got the German energy transition strategy of craziness and let's get rid of nuclear versus what would have happened if they didn't. But nuclear has been on a decline since Chernobyl and Fukushima. There were some issues. And uranium pricing has been pretty mediocre, except for one incident when a mine flooded in 2008. But the nuclear industry globally is now awake. And it is driven by decarbonisation because nuclear, other than hydro, nuclear is only mass available, baseload generating, zero carbon source, which is on 24/7. And we've got a great set of new technology. I know people talk about SMRs. Look, I'm not so excited about SMRs or the terminology because, get rid of the S and put an L. Large modular reactors, well, that's kind of what we have today in terms of the APR 1400 and the AP 1000. Modular just means factory line efficiency to make these things cheaper. We should also note a bit of a chat about AI because renewables are no longer the prettiest girl in the street. All the major AI companies are going nuclear. In fact, Microsoft building their own reactor. They are all choosing nuclear because the AI requirements are literally insane. They're talking about multiple gigawatts of capacity for a single data center to drive these AI models, and you just do not get that level of dispatchable energy from a renewable system. So, the opportunity for Australia in AI, the biggest growth industry in the world over the next 10 to 20 years, will be gone if we do not have mass available dispatchable baseload power, probably driven by nuclear. So the rest of the world is going nuts on nuclear. There's been the triple nuclear pledge signed at COP28 last year. But the problem is there's not enough uranium in the world. So where's that uranium going to come from? And then in addition, the US has gone, they've doubled down. They've just banned Russian enriched uranium coming in to the US. That is a problem because it accounts for about 25% of their entire supply, and it also means that Kazakhstan has trouble selling into US markets because a lot of their uranium comes out through Russia. So what have they done? They've put billions of dollars on the table, literally billions, for like-minded, politically aligned, Western-friendly countries who have uranium. They are offering billions of dollars to help develop uranium supply chains. Australia should be part of this. We're not. We are not, and it blows my mind. But I know where my AUKUS people are. We have representatives from AUKUS here today, who we are so thankful that the US and the UK are going to share with us that they're world leading nuclear technology to help us with our nuclear submarines and with meeting our national interests and security requirements. But I've got a message for you guys to take back to Washington and London. We have an industry here. We want to give you uranium. We can't at the moment, but we have the capability to do it. And maybe with a little bit of a phone call from Washington or London, that might just, will that be the straw that breaks the camel's back? Well, there are going to be a few straws that hopefully break the camel's back. Next political campaign. Yeah, so Dutton always gets drawn like a potato, but the funniest one is always Mr. Bowen. He tries to dress up his resistance to nuclear in economics. Let me tell you, it is not as ideological. And he does that because he knows, actually ideological stuff doesn't really go well with the electorate. So he says, no, it's because renewables are cheap and nuclear is expensive. So we're going to talk about that in a sec. And here's another one. This is an image, a drawing from COP28 where the rest of the world is saying triple nuclear and Bowen's saying no. We have a Prime Minister, I know you can't read that. Albanese is quoted as saying nuclear does not help climate change, right? The rest of the world and the United Nations would respectfully disagree with him with that, but that is the kind of ideological resistance we have from our government at the moment. So hopefully it's going to be a very interesting election period. Instead, they've got us down this path of mass renewables, 82% renewables by 2030, and they have never told us what it is costing. So really clever bit of marketing and government here, and you learn it from Yes Minister, right? Demand how much the alternative is going to cost, but never say what the current path is costing, and that's where we are today. Although I think Net Zero Australia did put out a number of $1.5 trillion, by the way. So I've also been asked to do a quick few things on nuclear myths. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. There's some funny stuff. Anyone who wants more detail, please let me know. So myth one, Australia doesn't have a nuclear industry. Well, actually, we don't have nuclear weapons. We don't want them. That's in red. If you look at that slide, the only thing we don't have at the moment is a civilian nuclear industry. We've got world-class uranium. We've got technology and enrichment. What Silex is doing is phenomenal. We have an ANSTO reactor, and in fact, we have the best radioactive waste repository in the Southern Hemisphere already operating, and it's in WA. And I approved and built it, and I think it's fantastic. It is an amazing, amazing asset. Myth two, renewables are actually renewable. I don't want to get too much into renewable bashing here, but the point is, because renewables are low intensity, they take a shitload of, they take a lot of material, of mining, of concrete, of steel per megawatt hour that you get out. You can look at the screen there. If I had my clicker, I'd show you. Nuclear's down there, it's the small one. And then we actually end up with a lot of waste out of renewables. As you can see here, these use wind turbines in Texas. Big issue. And you might think, oh, they don't really have nasty stuff in them. Actually, there's a lot of nasty stuff, especially in solar panels. And Australia is actually on the verge of a interesting new industry opportunity, which is trying to do something with all the rooftop solar that's going to need to be replaced in the next 10 years. Nuclear waste myth. Okay, so there's been research on this, and I'm going to put my hand up. Who in the room used to think nuclear waste was green and oozed out of drums because you saw it on The Simpsons? Come on. Yep. So growing up in Australia without the internet, right? We didn't have the benefit of a nuclear industry. We didn't have, the only time I ever saw anything nuclear was when a aircraft carrier would go off gauge roads and you'd be sitting there going, that puppy's nuclear, that's awesome. There's been research to show, it was in a Senate report, The Simpsons is one of the main sources where Australians still get their information from on nuclear. It is crazy. Yet in the US, it hasn't had the same impact because they've had civilian nuclear around them all the time. They know the benefits. So reality, and actually that top image, look at words. That top image there is from the Climate Council, the propaganda. They can't even get that right. If you see the smokestack, that's a coal power station they've got with some yellow drums out the front. So what does nuclear waste really look like? Well, that's in the middle here. There's some people standing quite happily next to their intermediate level and high level waste, including Maddie on that bottom image. Maddie's 35 weeks pregnant. And she has absolutely no issue standing next to nuclear waste. And in fact, in the the Dutch over here on this image, they've decided to turn their nuclear waste repository into a tourist attraction. You can pay money, you go there, and it's an art gallery, so you can see art over here. Oops, yeah. And then nuclear waste next door. So transparency is the way that you solve any concerns about nuclear waste. Now, this is a fun one. Renewables are going to make your power prices go down. Guys, they're not, unfortunately. We've all been living through this. Renewables are going up. Yeah, what are our power prices doing? They're going up too. What does Chris Bowen say? Renewables are cheap, they're going to make power prices go down. Right, there's a little asterisk next to his comment. What Chris has said, and he actually, there was this press release about 4 months ago, power prices in the NEM have reduced by 3%, and they had in that quarter. Wholesale power prices, right? Wholesale. So in this image, this is the first little bar in the stack chart, right? And you know, renewables can make wholesale prices go lower, especially if there's a lot of wind, because you have to overbuild capacity and actually power prices can go negative, and it's a horrible thing. But it does not reduce your overall bill, because cheap wholesale and cheap, very energy diverse, transmission everywhere kind of networks have massive network costs. And so we do have Steve Wilson here. So Steve's an associate professor at UQ and a power systems expert. He gave me this brilliant quote. I'm going to steal it because it's the best way to explain it. If you're at home and you're ordering Uber Eats, right, do you want to buy a cheapy $5 pizza but with a $10 delivery fee, or do you prefer a slightly better $10 pizza with a $3 delivery fee? And that is exactly what renewables is going to deliver. It's cheaper power, but not delivered to the customer. And there's actually some interesting data here, which shows the higher you get in renewables, the higher your costs will get, and it keeps going up. So we've got a long way to go, and unfortunately on the trajectory we are going to have expensive power in this country. And this is what has happened in South Australia. So South Australia is, instead of the canary in the coal mine, they're the canary in the wind farm. I actually put canary getting hit by wind farm into a AI image generator, and they wouldn't let me do it. So I said, so it came out some terms of use violation. So I did canary flying through wind farm, and I got that. So South Australia has hit about 70% renewable. Whoops, back. And what have we got out of that? We've got massively increased volatility. We've got the highest power prices in Australia, in South Australia. And the only reason it works even at 70% is they've got a fat interconnector going into Victoria. And where does that interconnector go? Coal. They survive off that coal interconnector, because if they wanted to get enough storage or overcapacity for that last bit, and it's not just 4 hours that you need to model about, because some of these intermittencies last a very long time. It is extremely, extremely expensive. In fact, I said Bowen mentioned that power prices had got cheaper, but this quarter he can't say that, because actually wholesale prices have gone up 23%, because there's been a wind drought in the entire NEM. So wind is actually quite highly correlated across the east coast, and there hasn't been any of it for like a quarter, and that's a bit of a problem. Next myth busting, radiation is actually scary. So people on a uranium mine will get about 2 millisieverts a year. This is just a number, right? People doing long-haul flight attendants will get 4. You get more as a flight attendant than you will in uranium. And this is the key to it. This is called the linear no threshold model. You see here. There's no data available on low dose and the effects on the body. There's data on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and all they do is they draw a straight line down to 0 and say, okay, well, that's what it is. And that is the most, even the ICRP says this is the most egregious use of the linear threshold model, is to do that to predict increased cancer rates from low dose radiation. So that even best practice says you do not do it. And I've got a little example here. So if you jump off a building from 20 metres and it's going to kill you, safe bet, right? What the linear threshold model says is, okay, well, if we got 20 people to jump off a 10 centimetre step and they do it 10 times, one of them's going to die. That is what the linear threshold model says to low-dose radiation. And that is actually a problem because what it does is overestimates risk and therefore says to our regulatory authorities, we need to spend money on cleanup and spend finite resources on things which maybe we shouldn't or maybe we don't need to do. And there is a really, really interesting case study here from Taiwan. So in Taiwan, they got some scrap steel and it came from somewhere else. It was unfortunately massively irradiated with cobalt-60, but they didn't realise it at the time, and they built some buildings with the rebar. And so there was this instance where about 200 buildings in Taiwan were receiving, the residents were receiving 400 millisieverts a year, every year for 20 years. And they could track who these people were. This is a one-in-the-world case. And what they found, funnily enough, as opposed to the linear threshold model saying there should have been 70 cases of cancer, there were 3. There should have been a massive amount of birth defects. There weren't. In fact, there were lower levels of cancer and birth defects than you found in the regular population in Taiwan. And this is known as a hormesis effect. And so it just shows that the LNT is used because people are scared of radiation, but it drives us to use our resources, our finite resources, in a way that perhaps we shouldn't. Now, people may have heard about GenCost and EMO because anything that says anything in this country that says nuclear is expensive and renewables is cheap, if you look at it, it all comes back to the one report, which is GenCost. And so I was asked to say some words. And we're in a mining group here, so this is how I'm going to explain it. If you put out 4/5 of your project under boot agreements or off-balance sheet funding so you don't have to say it's your own CapEx, how much does your project really cost? And that is exactly what they've done with GenCost. They have excluded all sorts of stuff, and so now Chris Bowen tries to report this little number here, this one number, and says renewables are cheaper. Not the way it actually works when we look at a whole of system cost. And they rely on something called levelised cost of electricity. I'm not going to try and explain this. Levelised cost of electricity is a term that was coined by Lazard, which are a consulting firm, and it sounds really cool. Levelised cost of energy, wow, it must be all-encompassing and really complicated. It's not. It's a present value of cost of operation and investment and fuel over the energy produced. That's it. And in fact, if we look down our little hierarchy here, if we say, we've got about 80 gigawatts in the NEM, if we say we just want one new power station, half a gigawatt, doesn't even have to be firm, it can just be intermittent, we can use LCOE. You can do that. As soon as you say, actually, I need that power 24/7 and not intermittent, oh, okay, 2 minutes, all right, 3. We need to use levelised full system cost of energy. So they're not telling you the full story. And it comes to here. I'm going to skip over this. Oh, okay. Just as an example, they tell you renewables are cheaper. They put a 48% capacity factor on wind in that model. The best we've ever achieved in the NEM is 30%. Now, that's not just an 18% difference, right? That is 18% over 30. They have undercooked the numbers by 60%. So you need 60% more renewables to get there. 30-year life on a solar plant and 30-year life on a nuclear plant. Unbelievable. Offshore wind, we'll talk about some more of this. Let's talk about uranium later, yeah? We are actually building offshore wind in this country because there is a policy on it from the Victorian government, not because GenCost said it was cheaper. In fact, even on GenCost numbers, the one damn thing that is more expensive than nuclear in GenCost numbers is offshore wind, and yet we're building it. So even though we're getting to 82% renewable, we are not building a cheap system. And this is the final thing before we'll have a break. The only way it says renewables are cheaper is if you firm them, so that means move power from the day to the night, and we get all of you guys in the room to pay for it. So what their modelling says is every one of you, actually 95% of you, will buy a Tesla Powerwall, you'll stick it on your wall, you'll pay for it yourself, and you'll let the network draw that storage out. And then therefore they don't have to say there's $100 billion of storage costs to firm the renewables. So the renewables are cheaper. Now, if you assume that under a nuclear scenario and under a baseload centric scenario, we wouldn't buy Tesla Powerwalls in the same way, well then you have to include that cost. And the good example is Germany versus France. France, what we should be, baseload dominated nuclear, there is literally 1,000 Tesla Powerwalls in the entire freaking country. Germany, closed nuclear, full renewables like Bowen wants to do, there is about 250,000 Tesla Powerwalls. So to me that demonstrates that there is a difference on that kind of CER strategy, depending on your generation source. So, okay, so we'll talk about more. Let's talk more about some uranium in WA stuff, because didn't get to that.
You've got too much energy.
Okay.
I'll start with just a first question that's come through on the Slido app from Andrew, who says, ask, where can we download your presentation? Obviously, there's a lot of information in your head, Jonathan, so if people would like to access your entire deck of slides, then we'll
work something out. ASX wouldn't let me release it, but I might try and get it through ASX, but they're a bit funny about it.
Okay.
Something will happen.
Sure.
Follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. You're a prolific poster, to say the least. Look, try as we might to have a discussion about this without getting political. It's nigh on impossible, isn't it? I just wanted to get your thoughts. You know, obviously you are a uranium miner. If you could only have one wish, one thing on your Christmas list, I'm sure it would be to lift the ban.
Correct.
The debate at the moment is really dominated by the nuclear energy component. Yeah. Has that been a help or a hindrance in your efforts? No, it's been a hindrance. And so, look, I am a big supporter of nuclear energy. It's the right thing for our country. I just wish we'd been able to change a ban here first and then wait a couple of years and then do the federal one. Because, and I do media, I do radio, and you get these Karens or whatever call up, and I say, but hang on, uranium mining doesn't produce nuclear waste. And they're like, but Dutton said this and this about nuclear waste. They confuse the issues. All we want to do, dig up uranium, process it to yellow cake and ship it out. And you know what? Yellow cake's not even radioactive. I mean, it's a little bit radioactive, but if you're standing next to a drum of yellow cake, right, for 5 hours, I would get more radiation on the plane from Perth to Sydney than I would from a drum of yellow cake. It gets driven on public roads in South Australia, literally through the middle of Adelaide, out to Port of Adelaide, public roads, no one ever knows about it, no issues. Yep.
Yet for some reason, our government says we can't do it safely in the world's best mining jurisdiction. It's a crock.
In terms of safety, you mentioned nuclear waste and how everyone's been sort of guided by the Simpsons and the green sludgy stuff. Can we talk about waste? Because that is a big feature in the anti-nuclear campaign. You mentioned Sandy Ridge, but there's a proposal for a facility in Kwinana as part of
AUKUS.
Of AUKUS. Yeah. What do you make of the way that's been talked about?
That is an entirely political move. So the material that is going to go into that thing in Kwinana could go into Sandy Ridge. It's of the same category, and so. That's a facility that's superfluous, it's not needed, it costs more money, probably freak out the residents around Kwinana. And I can only think that is a political move because the federal government, they don't want us to say, hey, actually radioactive waste is an issue that we can actually solve with an existing facility. Right? We've been told that it's scary and all this kind of stuff. What I expect, and that would then play into a civilian nuclear strategy of the Liberals, so I can understand why federal Labor don't want to do that. What I expect will happen is we'll get the election out of the way, and then I think the proposal for that facility will go away, and they should come to their senses and put it at Sandy Ridge.
Obviously there are state and federal elections on the horizon. Looking into your crystal ball, how do you see things playing out in terms of you hopefully getting the state ban overturned? And then if that's phase one, do you see that as being kind of achievable in the shorter term and then...
Well, not before the election,
no,
to be clear.
Certainly not.
But, can it happen who knows what's going to happen in this election? The Liberals and Libya here is openly happy to lift the ban. and I hope that is the case. Look, if we get another Labor government for another term, I think a change in policy is still possible. For uranium.
Yes.
Nuclear, yeah, not so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a moment here. One of the other arguments against nuclear power is the timing. You know, you talk about how the demand for uranium is going through the roof at the moment. That's largely coming from countries that already have established nuclear industry there in their country, right?
There's a whole lot of new countries. Yeah, okay. Yep.
But we'd be starting from scratch here.
No,
and Peter Dutton has, sorry, in terms of building a lot of the infrastructure, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah?
So
just, and Peter Dutton has conceded that the 2030 Paris Agreement target would have to be shelved. So I'm just saying the timing argument is routinely used to shout down the pro-nuclear argument. What do you make of that?
I don't think, if you saw that chart I put up about how many bloody wind farms we have to build by 2030 to hit their 82% target, I don't think it's going to happen in reality. Look, in terms of starting from scratch is a complete crock. We have a world-leading industry in this country. And for those that don't have a civilian industry, and I take the words from Helen Cook. Helen's not here today, but so in Australia, we have the world expert on nuclear regulation. She literally wrote the freaking textbook. She's consulted by governments across the world. And her words are, for any country that doesn't have an existing civilian nuclear industry, Australia is the best placed because of all the other supporting industry we've already got in place. And look, in terms of time frame, yeah, this whole nuclear is slow thing is frustrating. And there's some great analysis that was published on Twitter today, actually. But it breaks down the time frame for construction of megawatts. And so even if you took what happened in the UAE and said it took 16 years or whatever it was to build, it's still about 300 megawatts per year that gets built. You will not build a wind farm over 200 megawatts a year. So you can build nuclear relatively quickly. And, you know, obviously with more modularity and everything, those timeframes improve.
You very briefly mentioned hydrogen.
Yeah.
They haven't had the greatest of weeks, I think it's fair to say, particularly with Toogie's announcement last week. However you want to phrase it, scaling back, shifting the goalposts, moving the timeline, however you want to phrase it. How much of a boost is that for what you're trying to prosecute as an argument?
You know, our federal government and our state government both put a lot of weight on the renewable energy superpower, underpinned by green hydrogen. And there are a lot of technical issues to solve if that ever gets solved to get competitive hydrogen. And so, you know, we need, how many jobs did someone say we'd lost up here? 9,000?
About 700 for...
but across the mining industry, we need jobs.
Yeah, thousands.
And uranium can deliver 10,000 jobs. On existing, you know, all we're asking to do is dig it up and sell it.
Yeah. What's going to be the tipping point to lifting the ban on uranium mining here? What is it going to take?
I think it is, I actually think it's Simandou coming online. Obviously everyone knows the big iron ore project, probably combined with a few more tonnes coming out of Brazil and seeing an iron ore price that starts with a 6 and that freaking people out.
We've got heaps of questions coming through here. Steve O'Day was first in, so I'll go with your question here, Steve. What would it take to build a uranium processing facility, should the laws allow it, of course, in Australia to refine, enrich and produce fuel? So
I think in this country we will not convert an enriched facility with existing technology. Sort of old. There is a reason why the US stopped doing a lot of its own conversion and enrichment and went to Russia and went to China, because there are some stages of that that are a little bit problematic. Newer technology like Silex is doing, yeah, absolutely, let's build it here. The only thing we would need to do, so the EPBC Act actually has a civilian nuclear reactor and actually an enrichment facility is 2 separate lines, B and C, I think it is from section 140, Nick? Yeah. So strike 2 lines instead of 1, we can do it.
I noticed this week, and you've posted about it on LinkedIn, you're drilling at the moment, right?
We are, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're obviously doing that because you sense a change in the winds at some point.
Yes,
I
so
mean, you wouldn't do it unless you had some hope, right?
there are a number of uranium companies in WA that are here in the room. When the ban first came in 2017, the department would not give you a drilling permit for uranium. Wouldn't do it. We've had 9 now approved in the last 7 or 8 months.
Yeah.
So there's practically a change somewhere there. And you know, we've got a really big resource. It's going to get bigger. Probably got a couple of years of drilling left. So, and then we're going to deliver a feasibility study. So, you know, I'm giving myself 2 years to change the policy.
Okay.
Get done.
Clock's ticking.
Yeah. I'm like a dog with a bone, man. It's not stopping till it gets done.
I sense that. Yeah. Alex asked the question, and I'm sure many others have had the same thought, how can we move on from the flawed CSIRO Gen Cost report?
Yeah, so I had, in my first draft, guys, I had 100 slides to get through. Because the guys at Mining Club specifically asked me to do myth-busting on nuclear and on Gen Cost. Oh man, come and talk to me. There is some work being undertaken by some outside groups to highlight those issues, but the whole point of it, Gen Cost is a freaking model, and I used to be a financial modeler. I'll make a financial model say whatever you want. It literally depends on the assumptions, and we can change 4 things in Gen Cost, and nuclear is cheaper. Only 4 that are quite reasonable. I only went through one of them being capacity factor. So the point is, don't get hung up on Gen Cost. It's just a model. Let's look at what everyone else is doing around the world, and they're all building nuclear as baseload. They're building renewables as well. It's all of the above.
So to those people who are liking and endorsing the question, how can we get your presentation? Can you get them the 400 slides? I don't think that will be a problem, just quietly. Storing nuclear waste. Is anyone currently storing their waste in the facility that you mentioned? That's a question from the floor. So
that facility at Sandy Ridge is a low-level radioactive waste repository. When Kimber got canned a couple of years ago, that was the federal government's effort to get a low-level rad repository up, and that fell over on a technicality. The Labor government, by the way, could have fixed that procedural issue. Chris Bowen says they didn't want to, because they didn't want to be seen to be solving a radioactive waste issue. So when Kimber fell over, ANSTO started sending material to Sandy Ridge. So yes, Sandy Ridge is sending some stuff from ANSTO, but it is low level as opposed to intermediate level.
There's a question here too about nuclear submarines coming through Freo. Obviously, as AUKUS comes closer to being, coming online, it's something that the public broadly accepts, right? The polls all show that
I think it's one of
most Australians are in favour of AUKUS.
Yeah, absolutely.
How critical do you see that? People sort of getting used to the idea of having nuclear things in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to our AUKUS friends earlier about this, where, you know what, they open up those for public viewing, there would be lines a mile long. So let's open them up, and get the 16-year-olds with 100,000 followers on Twitter or that other thing they use, TikTok. Get people there that are opinion leaders. Yeah. And because it's seeing it, any worry just goes away. Yeah. So it's you and influencers that are going to turn the tide. Funnily enough, you'd be surprised. And people like Jazz, and that there are specific demographics that are what you call problematic, and one of them is actually young adult females. Yeah. And the more I know, it's just a weird gender divide there. We've got a lot of work to do. Yeah. In the sort of the young mum category. Yeah. All right. I think we're out of time. Are we? Bugger. Jonathan. Yeah. Do you want to leave us with a final thought? Because I know we had to savagely cut your presentation short there. Do you want one final thought you want to leave us with? There is a phenomenal opportunity for WA to play a role in global decarbonisation. So mining uranium and selling it is the single highest leveraged thing we can do. We could try and build a lot of green hydrogen, and we would never get close to the impact on climate change we can have by opening up a few uranium mines and flogging some uranium pounds. Yeah. All right, thank you. I'll get you to stay there and invite Danny Tarmody back up to the stage for a formal vote of thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Jonathan. So I took a few notes whilst listening to Jonathan's presentation, which was very vibrant. The global nuclear industry is now awake. AI requirements in nuclear energy and the opportunity for Australia in AI will be gone, and it's likely going to be driven by nuclear energy in the future. Nuclear energy doesn't help with climate change, says Mr Albanese, but other countries disagree, including many people in the room, I'm sure, as we have a large representation of pro-nuclear energy. WA has world-class uranium, and we have the best radioactive waste facility in Australia right here with Telus Holdings Sandy Ridge, which I've been fortunate enough to actually venture into and have a site visit, which is just shy of 200 kilometres west of Kalgoorlie. And uranium can deliver 10,000 new employment opportunities, which all we need to do is dig it up and sell it. So thank you so much for a passionate presentation and fireside chat. Please thank Jonathan, CEO from Cauldron Energy.